Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Silvates podcast. I'm really excited today because I'm going to be talking to Alex Haydon, who's a graduate in osteopathy, and I'm really going to get her experience of what it's been like a year down the line, the bumps, the good stuff, and what she would have done differently, if anything. So, thank you for joining me today, Alex.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on here after watching loads of your podcasts previously and stuff. So I'm really excited to chat.
Oh, thanks. And I think one of the things that drew me to you, especially because we were both at BCom together, I think you were a couple of years below me.
I think I was just a year below you guys,
Yeah.
but I mean, who knows? It was such a jumble of years that it's hard to keep track of anyway. So
Yeah. And I remember one of the things that drew me to you was just you had a really good energy. And
thank you.
especially because I think you demoed for us once in one of our classes, because you're a dancer by background.
Mm.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I remember the class you're talking of because it was Lazarus doing a sort of performing arts class, what you can expect to see, or to give you a deeper understanding of what a dancer does day to day. Um, but yeah, my background in dance was predominantly contemporary, which is a big word which defines nothing really. It's just so varied in that form. And I started a lot later than the average dancer would. So I didn't do ballet when I was 3 or anything like that. I kind of was very athletic in primary school, and then I went to a performing arts secondary school, if you can call it that. And one of the teachers said, "Oh, you should go down the road to the place in Euston and do some dance classes." Me and my mum didn't know what we were doing, and she ended up signing me up for this like vocational scheme basically to set you up to be a professional dancer. So it kind of like went from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. But I think in my personality anyway, I just kind of go head like straight first into things. And it was really intense. I did that along school, and then yeah, I did the National Youth Dance Company as well. And throughout this time, it was not an easy journey per se, but it taught me a lot of lessons to do with discipline, self-worth and self-value, and yeah, generally self-expression as well. Yeah, it didn't come up with without the hard parts to that, but yeah, I miss it a lot. But yeah, can't think of much more to add. Yeah, I did start a degree in contemporary dance as well at the same institution. And during that time, I got an injury and I had a lot of time to self reflect. And I had an amazing osteopath kind of assist me throughout my time there. And then I made the change to go to BCom and study osteopathy. So, yeah, that's a brief, brief roundup of that.
Yeah. And I mean, likewise, I danced when I was a child, but I didn't go into like a specialist school. It sounds like you went to
Oh,
like the
cool.
fame school of dance or something. Like everyone's
It's
wearing leg warmers or something.
yeah, and a bit more chilled than that. But no, it definitely sounds like that to most people, and it definitely was intense. But yeah.
And so, is that the turning point where you thought, you've had this injury, you've, been treated by an osteopath, and you've had this time to reflect? Was that the main turning point where you decided to study osteopathy?
Partially, there were a few things before that that made me need to take a step back. So some health issues when I was 16, 17, that basically I was in a physical state where if I didn't get better, I would never be able to dance. And my osteopath helped me through that as well. And I got better, luckily. And then I maybe due to that, I was slightly weaker anyway, which predisposed me to the knee injury that I got. And not that the knee injury was going to be limiting me forever, but just having that time out, I thought about my background, um, like my socioeconomic background, the fact that my mum was a single mum, and what did I really want for in my life. Um, I think I wanted more stability than dance and performing could offer me, as well as the kind of mental knockbacks you would get so regularly. I don't think I had the right personality to deal with that on such a regular basis. And so, yeah, the injury was like the final, the final straw, and made me, yeah, come to terms with the change that I needed to make.
Yeah, because I almost think about dance as being athletes on the same level, because you go through the same physical conditions, you've got the same psychological and mental sort of, I don't want to say blocks, but the same processes that athletes go into when they compete. For you, it's a show, for example. And so I always think of them akin. And I think that's from conversations, having, well, when I was a dancer back in the day. And, conversations have like listening to like Lazarus talk and things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I, like you, kind of think of them on the same plane, and it's different in that for a dancer, you're repeating the same kind of piece, maybe dance piece, over and over again, but you're expected to be so much more dynamic than like an athlete who does a certain track or field, sport or whatnot. But yeah, no, what was I going to say? Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think in terms of my mentality now, I definitely think elite kind of athletic performance should encompass both sport athletes and high demand physical beings like dancers or circus performers and stuff like that. So yeah.
And that was quite novel. Did you always have like osteopaths in your schools or in your companies?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never heard of an osteopath until I went to this institution, and the process of getting in, kind of like a footballer would at going to a new football club, you have a triage or a screening where they do a really long physical assessment. They get you to do lots of different things that you wouldn't think you'd need to do for dance, maybe body composition type assessments and analyses. And I remember the osteopath saying to me, you're really not in a physical condition to like excel at this as quickly as you need to compared to other people in your age group, because as I said, I started a bit later. And that really motivated me to work really hard and train really hard. But yeah, it was an interesting experience having an osteopath there throughout the ages of 13 to 20, I guess. And I'm so grateful because a lot of people I know who went to different institutions didn't have that luxury. Yeah, it was a pain in the ass booking an appointment with them because they were so in demand. But no, they were amazing.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's such a progression from when I was in a dance company. Like we didn't have any physical therapy. Like we got injured, and as you do with any type of dance, you get
Yeah.
injured left, right, and center, and you come to expect it, but you just sort of either you dance through it, which is not always the best thing to do, or you just get on with it and just treat yourself and sort of manage, and you just get to the next rehearsal and just try your best because that's what you have to do. Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
but I think that speaks to the tenacity of who you are as a person. Because I imagine if someone told me, you don't have the same, I can't remember what the words you used were, but like, you don't have the same level as the people, you're in the same class with, it would just break me.
Mm.
So the fact that you thought, okay, well, this is going to motivate me to work even harder, that's huge.
I don't know why I was like that. I feel like maybe it was my upbringing. Um, my mum was never kind of mollycoddling of me or saying, "Oh, that was amazing, well done." It was very much like, "Let's be real, that's not good enough, and this needs to change." But it was never a personal thing. It's just um, these, as long as your goals are outlined, I think, then you can take the criticism and move forward with it. Whereas if there's no foresight into what can happen or what you can change, then yeah, you can't help but take it personally. So yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever watched Dance Mums?
I think I've seen someone called Jojo Siwa
Yeah,
maybe
so she
from
was
it.
on
Yeah.
it. But like
Um,
the head coach or the choreographer is Abby Lee Miller, who's this like
okay.
militant, strict, screams at you kind of thing. And so I'm hoping she was a very softened, your mom was a very softened version of that.
Maybe. I'll have to check her out on YouTube or something. But yeah, contrary to popular belief, I hate watching dance TV shows. Like Strictly is my worst nightmare. And I'm not a ballroom dancer, of course. But yeah, I just hate seeing things done badly. Or like bad technique is like still a bugbear of mine.
So how does that translate then into osteopathy? Because you've got all this body awareness and how your
Mm.
own body moves. So how do you translate that to your work?
Definitely still a learning progress. But I remember Lazarus constantly saying, it's a dance. Like when you're moving the patient, you're moving with them. You're not just picking up a limb and moving it around. You're flowing with them, and there's a lot of give and take. And yeah, utilizing your center of gravity and able to assist you and really take your time and think about the rhythm that you do things in. I think maybe you spoke about this similarly with Tato. Is it Tato who you had on
Mhm.
the podcast previously? I found that conversation really interesting because it brought up so many thoughts for me as well. Um, but I think I came at it not. I think I tried to come at it from a dance perspective, but was constantly like just trying to understand the anatomy, and that was like a block. And only now, when I start to play around with the techniques and morph them into something else, do I think I'm dancing more with it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people, that can, when somebody tells you you have to think about the rhythm of your treatment or the way you move a person's limb or anything, it can feel really disjointed for some people, especially if they haven't come from that kind of background where it's not second nature, where they're not grounded in themselves before they start approaching anything.
Hmm.
Um,
In terms of musicality, which is a word that I still don't know how to define. I was always really bad at that, to be honest. We'd do so many classes where there was a rhythm, so either a two or a three, which I don't know if saying that makes any sense to you. It's like a one, two, three, one, two, three. And doing all of that, we'd have to do physical movements to correspond with a rhythm. I was always awful at it. But I think because there's no music to work with in osteopathy, it's harder because you've got to find this internal rhythm that either exists or it doesn't. And so I find it amazing that people who don't come from a background in music or physical performance can make it look so effortless without having a background like that. So it makes me look at other practitioners and think, wow, you do that so smoothly, and it looks relaxing just watching it.
yeah, and that reminds me of when I was in clinic as a student, and there was one of my colleagues, Marcelo, who had done a lot of capoeira before. And I remember
Mm,
watching his treatment thinking, that just flows.
mm.
And it's such a testament to his background. I know it's capoeira is, I mean, I'm not going to butcher the definition of it because I will get lots of comments afterwards like that's not what it is. But it's such a testament to his background, and you can certainly see that because I had been out of the dance world for many years at that point when I was at BCom, so I didn't have that flow or that rhythm that you talked about. I could recognize it, but me
Mm.
counting just gives me PTSD of ballet and being at the bar, and it's like your chest, tuck your bum, like it's just that's just jarring for me. But I didn't have that inherent musicality in my treatment. And I think that was because I thought about everything so much that I was overthinking whilst
Mm.
I was treating, to the point where I wasn't even listening to the body in
Yeah.
front of me. especially when you're a student. I mean, hopefully that's changed.
Yeah, but I mean, even with me, one of the things that I'd written down to talk about with you about was how when we were in BCom clinic before graduating, and even in my first year, giving everything to someone. And when I look back, I gesture with it like this, as if it's aggressive, just kind of like giving everything you've got to a treatment rather than actually taking a step back, slowing everything down, and doing maybe four things in that treatment at a pace that's more therapeutic, where you're actually palpating and noticing change rather than just doing it for the sake of you want to get as much, you want the patient to get as much value for money as possible almost, but actually they're not if you're just kind of yeah, going with the technique rather than a treatment process. So yeah.
And how has that evolved for you from being at a student clinic to graduating? And I want to talk a bit more about that later, because you graduated at the worst of times. It was not a fun time to graduate. But
Oh god.
how has that sort of translated to, because when you were in clinic, at least in your last year, it was the height of the pandemic. You weren't really
Mm.
seeing that many patients, I imagine, if at all. And so how have you been able to acquire that through that process, and then having graduated, because you're what, a year on now from graduating?
Um, to be honest, it changes all the time. Every time I sit to reflect, um, it's interesting. Whenever I sit to reflect, my mind goes blank, but it's in those moments kind of after a treatment that's gone how you wanted it to, that I think that's what I wish I could do with everyone, or that's how I wish I could be all of the time. But initially graduating, I think, like you said, things were very quiet. It was the height of the pandemic, basically. Kind of in the summer, I started working. So things had eased off, and little did we know they were going to plummet straight back down again during the winter. So numbers were very inconsistent, and it was hard to develop a method of practice that was working. But at the same time, it afforded me the time to reflect. So not all bad. Um, but I definitely, for the first 6 months, I would say, was just kind of giving everything that I thought my particular diagnosis needed in terms of my treatment. And people were getting better, but I don't know how I would phrase it. I wasn't seeing as many people return as I needed to also make financial like earning. And I was speaking to a colleague about it, saying, people are getting better. So I know that I'm doing something good, which is great. But at the same time, my list is constantly fluctuating so much. And I need something more consistent. And he was like, well, what are you doing in the average treatment? How many different techniques are you doing? How long do you spend articulating a certain area, or doing what you need to achieve your goal? And I was like, oh, I'd completely forgotten to think like that. And I was so concerned with making the patient happy in my mind that I wasn't thinking about what their body needed. And yeah, so only recently have I really been slowing it down and noticing that maybe it takes a longer for people to get better. So maybe one or two extra treatments. I'm still achieving everything I need to, but their body isn't being bombarded with so much stimulus, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I think also relevant to COVID, I don't know if you experienced it as well, but those first kind of 6 months of me being out, I noticed lots of treatment reactions, or just sensitivity, or people who were really highly strung about various things in life at that point. And it wasn't until, again, 6 months down the line, I would say, everything they said at college about treating the body as a whole, and the mind and the body, was starting to make sense, like treating that person. as a whole encompassing person was starting to really click. Yeah, rather than as a body for me to move around. Yeah, so it's starting to get somewhere, starting to make sense slowly.
And that's the thing, it's that process you just have to trust in. And sometimes it's really hard to do that as a student because,
Mm,
you've got so many deadlines and dissertation and clinic and life outside of college and university to try and, I don't know, patch together, because you end up ignoring half of your friends because if they're not at BCom, you don't see them. Um,
exactly.
yeah, absolutely. And so it is trusting that process and just being able to not give in to it, but know that things align as they develop. And I
Mm,
had a tough time, and it only took me, I'd say, until summer clinic to figure that out, or for it to sort of really, for the penny to drop.
mm,
And that's when I thought, okay, I'm just gonna let go of all my neurotic, tendencies and just go with it. And what happens, happens. And like you said, like what you say reminds me of something that Adam Williams used to tell me. And I don't know if you ever had him in clinic, but he was such a calming influence. Like I was a mess in clinic. I'm not gonna lie. Like I
oh,
was really anxious.
I
I knew I could.
don't know. I feel like I observed you one time and you weren't like that at all. You were really kind of calm and calculated and methodical.
Oh,
So
thanks.
maybe you felt like that internally, but it wasn't being communicated
I can
outwards.
fake it really well. Um, but I remember I had him for a block of sessions and as a tutor, and he said, just do three things. And it's similar to what you said.
Mm,
He says, do three things, but do them really well. Because I
mm,
was in a similar way. I was throwing every single technique I knew for whatever condition I thought they had at them in the hopes that something would work. And then you don't
mm.
really know which one worked as a result. So you're like, yeah, you're better, but I have no idea what I did.
Yeah, what did it do? Was it just time? Was it that thing that I did? Or was it, I don't know, stress just reduced? Who knows?
Yeah. And earlier you talk about sort of that energy, and you sort of, you gestured with your hands like this. It was almost like a give and take almost of this energetic transference. And that's something that I definitely talk about in psychology, but on a therapeutic level, but never on a, no, well, not never, but not on a therapist patient sort of transfers of energy in terms of what am I giving you and what are you giving me back?
Hmm.
Have you thought about that, or has that come to you when you're treating?
Yes, and I remember it was a patient of mine at BCom who she was a junior doctor, I think, and we were exchanging patient stories in terms of like, I don't know, the types of things people say to you and how it can take you by surprise or whatnot. And she was like, have you ever heard of energy vampires? And I was like, oh, this is a strong term that I've not heard of before. She was like, yeah, it's someone that you give so much to, but doesn't really give anything back, and you're feeling more and more drained as you engage with them. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know if it's a term I would use, but no, there are definitely times where, say, I'm having a rough day and I'm like, oh, don't really want to see anyone today. I'm feeling really antisocial, but I've got to work. And my day can change just by the way that I interact with a patient or how they interact with me. Um, when there's a good chemistry or dynamic, it's really energizing. Um, but there are definitely times, especially during the pandemic, unfortunately, some people I've seen have lost loved ones due to COVID and for other reasons, or they're having a difficult time generally. Um, it can be hard to I mean, you're listening, or hopefully listening, but to take on board so much emotion from someone sometimes. I don't know if you equip yourself with like certain things in place to help you not take it on board so much. But yeah, sometimes I struggle to set a boundary or take some things away home with me and not let it dwell with me right into the deep of the night. But Yeah, no, I definitely find that I reflect on a patient practitioner relationship, but I'm not quite sure what it is. It's ever changing. So yeah, if you have any tips, that'd be
And
great.
you're absolutely right. It changes so much, and it changes from patient to patient, and it also changes within you. Depending how you're feeling, how much you've slept, what you've eaten the day
Mm,
before, all that kind of stuff. And I remember Louise Carruthers telling, because I took this to her. I was like, I'm not feeling great after treat a certain patient or a certain type of patient, and she was like,
mm,
you have to energetically just wash it off. And so she suggested like physically making sure you wash your hands with cold water
mm.
after you treat. And I've done that since.
Yeah, that's really
Um,
interesting you say that, because I did have a patient similarly who he'd gone through some really awful things this year, and he wasn't. You could tell he was putting on a brave face, but everything that I asked, unfortunately, seemed to go back to something unfortunate that happened. And after every time I saw him, I would always just wash my hands so much for a really long time. It was like a meditation almost.
mm,
Um, and it wasn't because I had any kind of disliking towards him or whatever. It was just like, wow, I need to cleanse my mind after that kind of emotional roller coaster. Yeah, because you're in there for a long time, but depending as well on how long you treat for, but either way, half an hour up to an hour, it can still feel like the time is never going to end.
absolutely. And it reminds me of something that Lazarus used to say. You're touching a patient, but the patient touches you in return. And
Mm,
so for me, that means that there has to be this transference of energy. It's not just a one-way thing.
mm,
And for me, I think because I came from a psychology background and therapy background, I was differently equipped at compartmentalizing. So
mm,
there would be times, yes, we would all, think about patients when we went home and like look up stuff. And then you do that naturally as a student. And I learned early on to, once I've left clinic. It's not to say that I don't do my research and look up conditions, but I don't over ruminate about a
mm.
patient because that doesn't give you the recovery afterwards.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, no one taught us how to really take care of ourselves. It's not something
I
that's
don't
embedded in the curriculum, for example.
I know, and I think it's different on each individual. So if you asked each tutor that was with you, how do you take care of yourself? I'm sure they'd all say completely different things. Um, so yeah, it's a hard one to teach, and I think generally there are so many things that I wish I'd known that even when we were there, we must have asked tutors various things, and they were like, "You'll learn it, don't worry." And I think in my mind, I was like, "Oh, I'll learn it in like the following year whilst I'm still here." But no, it's like you learn it with experience and through going through these things that inform you about it.
And I hated when somebody said that to me. It's like, it'll come. I'm like, no, 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 it needs to come now.
Yeah.
Like,
Now,
when's it
please.
coming? Because I'm on a deadline here.
No, I remember those moments for sure. Or like one tutor, I wanted to understand more pathological conditions, and one was like, but why, you've got so much time. And I was like, yeah, but my brain is craving it now. I need this knowledge. And it's like, you can't, kind of like with back going back to the technique thing, build your strong foundation now and get good at these things. Otherwise, if you expand your repertoire and you're mediocre at all of them, or have a mediocre understanding of all of them, it's not going to serve anyone too well. So yeah, both frustrating, and I understand it now. I'm on the other side.
And definitely for me, coming in as a tutor now, and that's what I want to talk to you about as well. Um, I was that person in the front row asking questions, like constant one after the other, after the other. If I wasn't getting something, I'd really make sure I hammered it down. And being on the other side, I can see like, whoa, you need to just chill. Just
Mm,
and there were so many things I wish I could go back and tell myself as a student. I'm wondering if there's anything that you would go back and either do differently or tell yourself to do?
Oh, I completely get what you were talking about though, as another tutor, and seeing kind of yourself in some students now and thinking like you're going at it so intensely, just slow down and be patient. I think, yeah, patience is um, the thing that I would tell myself. It will come with time. And I'm sure there were people that did tell me and it just really frustrated me. But um, yeah, you know what, talking about this reminds me of when I was in second or third year, I took up a new hobby, and it took me months and months, if not over a year, to actually develop the skill level that was required to be good at it. And it's kind of like any new thing, it takes time to refine and practice and get good at something. And it's frustrating, obviously, but if you don't if you're cutting your journey short by any means, you're not going to enjoy the journey, or you're not going to have gone the whole journey. So just kind of enjoying the pace of it while it lasts, rather than trying to kind of um yeah, take too many steps forward, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And none more so than in your final year, because you, like I said, you've got so many pressures, so many deadlines. You know, you've got FCCs coming up. It's the be all and end all. It's literally the culmination of the whole 4 years of what you've been working towards. And I remember one of my friends, who's also an osteopath, Cami, telling me just enjoy fourth year. Like, don't hate it. I know we
That
were
seemed
all
impossible at the time though.
it did, and it did, because we were all burnt out, we were all tired and hungry and sleep deprived. But I remember having that conversation with her, not just once. It took a couple of conversations like that, because it takes a while for things to really get into me. Um, but I remember just being able to sit back and almost not completely detach myself from the process, but just sit back and reflect and be like, actually, I'm exposed to so many different types of tutors. I'm never going to have this exposure anywhere.
Yeah.
And if I can tap into what I like about each of these tutors and just steal it, because let's be honest, you take the things that you like and maybe
Mm.
harness that or remember that way of thinking or that approach. Like, when are you ever going to be stimulated like that? And it's similar to what you were saying before about, you wanted more knowledge and you wanted to expand this really strong foundation. And I found that when you're a student, at least for me, when you're being stimulated on a daily basis, you're more prone to then learn more and go off and do more stuff. Whereas for me now, having graduated a couple of years ago, like, I'm only doing CPD and very niche things that I'm interested.
Mm.
How has that been for you?
Yeah, I think in terms of, yeah, just enjoying the journey, like going back to what you said, it's such a privilege to actually be in that educational institution where you're safe and your responsibilities are slightly less than if you were working full time, and you'll never have that time again. um, and so you really should just take the time to look around and see what you need to take from each tutor before you go. Um, but yeah, I mean, my CPD since leaving has been really random, to be honest. It's been so scattered. I'm not quite sure what I want to do. I think I took enough from each tutor that I had a connection with, but because I had a real interest in how they communicated their specialism or whatever, it's confused me more, because now I'm like, oh, they're all so cool. What do I choose to do? Do I go head first into a post grad like masters and spend a lot of money on this one thing, or do I do bits here and there of different things and have a more rounded way of practice? And I think that's the way I'll probably end up going down. Um, but yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's great to have people that have a kind of uni focused interest in something specific. Uh, but I think my brain is too frazzled to pay attention to just one thing now.
Absolutely. And I had like these grand visions of doing another master's afterwards. And I was so burnt out. I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to think about this for now.
Yeah.
It's just not that important. Like, it'll happen when it happens.
Mm,
And like you said, it is a privilege because there's such a financial burden to doing something like this. Because often with the course that we do, it's so full on, and it's not even, I wouldn't even consider it just a full time. It's like full time on top of that, because a lot of us had part-time jobs, and we're working around BCom hours and things like that. So to make it work and then get the grades that you needed to get as well, it certainly wasn't easy. So
mm,
it's definitely a privileged point of view to be able to do that and succeed successfully. And that's suddenly reflected not just by you, but in other people and graduates that I've talked to. And they always say that it's been a privilege to be able to do and study what they did. Absolutely.
mm. Yeah, I mean, to have those kind of safe boundaries, really, even just knowing that if something went wrong in college clinic, it's under your tutor's insurance. Not that it ever would get that far, but it's like, okay, there's a safety net here. Whereas you're seen as competent when you've done your FCC and you've passed it and whatnot, and you're an adult, and yeah, now you've got to be held responsible and accountable for the clinical decisions you make, and they have quite yeah strong repercussions if something were to go wrong. But no, it's one thing starting the course, and then when you get to that point coming to the end and you start to realize, oh shit, now it's getting serious. um yeah, I think a different sort of pressure takes over. At least for me, it did. I was like, I got here way too quickly. Like, this was way quicker than I expected. And yeah, it reminded me of when I was dancing at the institution. And I think when I took the time out, I realized again, it's a privilege to dance every day in this gorgeous studio with live musicians every single day. This isn't real life for dancers when they leave. Half of them are doing jobs in hospitality just to make things work, finding rehearsal space, rehearsal time. It's really hard to logistically organize life anyway. So taking the time to really cherish the educational confines you're in, I mean, it's easier said than done, but definitely important to do when you're out and away from it. Yeah.
I almost think about it like it's like once you've done your FCC, it's like you're just pushed out the nest. It's like, now go fly,
Yeah.
like, do something. And you're like, no, but I'm
Exactly.
still technically a student. What do you want me to do?
Or before your FCCs, when you're in your clinic groups or whatever, and the tutor is working with an individual who needs more support than say you did, and you're like, no, but I still feel like I really need you there, like, don't abandon me. And they're like, yeah, but you're fine, you'll be fine, I need to pay attention to this person. You're like, ah, internally panicking.
Absolutely. And now you're on the other side. So you're now a tutor. Tell me about what motivated you to go into that, and what you tutor in as well.
So I tutor in osteopathic technique for first and second years, and I this year started doing soft tissue techniques for first and second years as well. The soft tissue is definitely the harder of the two for me because it's not my method of choice in practice. I mean, I used soft tissue techniques, don't get me wrong, but I try to manipulate soft tissue whilst doing my osteopathic manipulative techniques. So that's really great, going back to that and learning and practicing again these techniques again and using them in practice. So initially, after I'd done my FCC, Minaj asked if we could have a chat, and he said, I think you'd fit in really well coming back as a tutor. And initially I was like, yes. And then I got a job that I hadn't heard from them in a while, and I was desperate to get a job and desperate to get money, and it ended up not working out for that reason. And then I ended up leaving that job that I was at and thinking, actually, it'd be really nice, because in that job I was working by myself in a room like for 12 hours a day. And I'm not someone that needs to have other people around necessarily, but I like to bounce ideas off of other people. And I thought this could actually be really valuable for me to go back with the people that taught me and be able to talk to them on another level now, because I've never asked how they thought my FCC went. But I'm like, it must have gone okay for me to be back here, right? Um, and yeah, take things from them that they wouldn't necessarily have said whilst you were still a student, offering a different kind of advice and being realistic about the profession. Because you've by this point kind of seen some of the scarier sides of it. So it's not as much of a shock, and it won't deter you because you've already made the commitment. But yeah, I don't know if I was ever like, I don't know if motivated is probably the right word, but I didn't go into it with a bucket load of confidence. I was taking it as a second opportunity to be a student in a way, if that makes sense. And I hope that doesn't sound really bad, but just sitting there as a fly on the wall and then pitching in every now and then, or demonstrating a technique or method of assessment is second nature now. So it's not so much of a struggle, but having the patience to go back and to listen and to learn again is definitely eye-opening. But I wouldn't say I was like super motivated to do it. It just kind of it was offered, it happened, and it luckily has worked out, and I've taken on extra modules and I've taken on another day there. But yeah, I take it as an extra learning opportunity, really. And the students, as you know, throw out questions that you're like, I'm going to need to think about that for a while. Or, and you know, you were one of those students too, and you're like, damn you, making me think so much. But yeah, I think the motivation will come when I'm more confident in my identity as a tutor, because that's still a bit of a hard thing to come to terms with almost. It doesn't seem quite right or quite real in a way.
Absolutely. And for me, I relate to that so much because I definitely had that imposter syndrome sort of feeling
Mm.
going on, especially in that first year when I came back and they asked me if I would teach psychology. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I'd love to. This is going to be great. And then I was teaching, I don't think I taught your year, it was the year below you. And I thought, these people know me when I was a student. This
Mm.
is it's a really interesting dynamic. Like, am I going to be taken seriously? You know, am I going to be able to deliver at the level that they want me to? So I definitely felt all the same things that you were feeling, and especially in terms of OT, I really just sat back and watched a lot, and I thought, oh, I forgot about that technique. Like, I can
Mm.
definitely do
Yeah.
it, but it's not something that's in my daily repertoire that I just pull out really quickly. And so for me, it was almost like going back to uni again. In a
Yeah,
way.
no, for sure. It's nice to hear that you've had that experience as
Totally,
well.
totally.
Because I was like, oh yeah, no, I find myself doing that now, or like it won't be every day, but I'll see something and think, oh yeah, no, that's a nice, easy technique, and I'll go back to doing that and not overcomplicate things so much. Yeah, there's real value to using the foundational techniques and methods of assessment for sure. Yeah.
Do you find yourself channeling things that other tutors have told you when you're a student? Because I definitely do that.
Yeah.
Like there were some things that I remember being taught by Matt Moisak. I don't know if he was around when you were a student. You know, just the way he held himself and his posture, and I remember suggesting a different way of standing with a student. I was like, that's a Matt thing. And it just shocked me. I was like, whoa.
No, for sure. I mean, and I mean, the current students wouldn't know that. I had him maybe as an assistant in soft tissue. You guys had him for more than that.
Yeah.
So I kind of know of him rather than know him. But with the current students, I do refer to like Kritika or Savash, like anyone who's still there that they would know of. Like they gave me a really good piece of advice. Here it is. Like, I mean, use it if you want to, you don't have to, but I personally found it kind of just opened my eyes and just yeah, completely changed how I did something basically. But yeah, I think it's nice to pass on that knowledge. And I think the other day I said in Savash's class, oh, Savash told our year to compile regional kind of notebooks for each area of the body, do arthrology, anatomy, pathology, diagnosis. And he said, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And then regurgitated the advice. And I think, well, it's good that I'm reminding you of your wise advice in a way, so it doesn't get lost almost because it's so valuable. So yeah, that was really nice.
Yeah, and just watching people like Savash and Kritika and Lazarus and Manoj, like it's like sitting in a masterclass. I just sit back and I enjoy it. I just sit there and
Yeah.
I'm like, give me some popcorn. I'll take some notes, but we're good. Like this is just a pure joy to be able to watch them and know how easy they make it look. Because
Mm-hmm.
when I'm up there and I'm trying to, perform or showcase a technique, I'm thinking of 100 million things that I need to say and all the contraindications and all of that stuff, and hoping it comes out coherent enough that they actually follow along. So they definitely make it look way easier than it is.
The finesse is real. I mean, when I was demonstrating a technique to first year last year, I mean, they made it out to be something quite spectacular, which to me it was just like, no, like I don't think I'm very fancy with it at all. You just kind of get used to it, and you take for granted the skill level that you've gained over the 4 years. And when you go back to year one, especially, you're like, this is what square one looks like. I was here once upon a time, and it seems so far away now. And my God, you look at your old tutors and think you've been doing this for 20 years, the same boring first year class for 20 years. I don't know how you deliver it with humor, with energy. It's just, yeah, it's given me a huge level of appreciation for what they do, because I don't think I could do
Well, I never did first year, so I can't even relate to that at all. But
it.
and even second year, it's still challenging enough for me. And some of the questions I got are definitely coming from a place where I wouldn't even have considered.
Mm,
And then that makes me go back and look things up and be like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And okay, let's try it that way.
yeah.
But also, in a way, just being able to pass on something down to the next sort of generation, it feels hugely gratifying.
For
And like,
sure.
hopefully, they'll do the same with the next person that they treat or the next people they encounter. And it's almost like, okay, this is a circle of life kind of thing.
Yeah, it's hard though, because with COVID and everything, they've had to be in bubbles, or they don't have the space necessarily to practice, or they have to have supervision, or yeah, there it just seems like you have to jump through more loopholes to actually have the time and place to practice now, which I mean is another thing that maybe I definitely took for granted, just having that easy access and practicing at 8 in the morning before your 9 o'clock class. And they can't do that anymore. And so yeah, hopefully it does get passed on. And I think it does. They, especially in the second year, they've earned a level of competence now, and they're really starting to realize that they can form an artistry. Like, I don't know what your class with them is like, because obviously we teach the same year, the same class on different days, but the class isn't like you do this technique. It's modifying everything that they learned before, and they're like, what on earth is going on? So yeah, it's now opening their eyes to, yeah, well, we told you all of that before, but let's, break it down and make it work for you in a different way, which is really exciting to see, because you've built up a foundation and you're slowly morphing it into something that makes their practice their own, because we're all so different as practitioners, and you forget how early that actually starts to develop.
Yeah, I always think of it as like Lego pieces, like, especially in that first year, you've all got this like base level, and now we're just adding Lego pieces or taking it out and putting it somewhere else. And it's not to say that a different technique is better or worse; it's just different,
Mm.
and it's just another tool in your tool belt. So don't get freaked out by this new technique and that you're not mastering it in the first 10 minutes that you've ever done it. Just remember it so that maybe with a certain patient, you'll be like, oh, maybe I should try it this way.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm so glad you talked about, going in at 8 o'clock to practice, because I feel like that validates what I'm telling them as well. Because I'm like, you know what? We used to come in an hour before school start and classes started to practice. And they look at me like, yeah, no, you didn't. So I hope they listen to this, and I hope they know that it wasn't just me, that it actually was a thing, because the amount of hours that you put in is extraordinary, and the
For
amount of hours
sure.
that you have to put in.
I mean, I remember you and I think Cami had come in to do, literally, you were in fourth year and you came and joined the third year classes just to get more practice in during the hours that you were already at BCom. So, I mean, you can't get more committed than that, really.
I mean,
But that was great in itself as well for me, because it was like, oh, Silva's here and he can help us, modify in a different way with his now like level of experience. And um COVID has definitely disrupted the relationships between the year groups, so they're looking back, it's like that was actually really cool to be able to have relationships with each other, back then.
absolutely, because there was so many things that I used to ask like the students in the further up years about, and be like, okay, how do you do this, and how do you test an SIJ in this position? And they'd be like, just get on a plinth and I'll show you. And it was so seamless and so easy to ask things like that it wasn't,
Mm,
and it was more this, let's just share information. And that's what I really love, and that's what for me the ethos of BCom was. It was this, we're all in this together,
yeah.
let's just share all this information, because just because one person elevates doesn't mean somebody else has to, not. It's
Yeah.
rise at the same level.
Yeah, I think that's why having such a strong, or developing a strong network of friends there was so important. And I find myself saying to them as well, you guys are all going to have different interests, but you got to use that to your advantage and meet in the middle and share ideas and talk about each other's strengths, because that will, yeah, bring everyone up, um, for sure. But I don't know if they do. Hopefully they do. It's not too late, but yeah, it's definitely something that I miss, because at the moment your diary clashes with whoever's in the same kind of clinic with you, and it's hard to find the time to actually catch up with each other. So I miss those opportunities.
Absolutely. And so reflecting over the last year, has, your first year like graduating, how is it measured up to what you're expecting it to be?
I think, this might sound really bleak. I thought I would be more satisfied, if that makes sense. I thought that I changed my kind of career choice, and I thought this job was going to be super consistent. My list was going to be consistent. Um, I would be more fulfilled in life, and I definitely am more fulfilled, but I don't feel fully fulfilled. And I think that's because I saw, or at least saw, so many people so passionate about osteopathy. And that's great. But I'm one of those people, again, comes back to my frazzled mind, where I can only pay attention to something for X amount of time. And then my brain starts wandering off. And I think for the work day, at least, I'm like, oh, that's knackering. I want to go and do something creative. Like every other aspect of my life cannot, under any circumstances, be related to osteopathy. I refuse. And it's not because I don't like my job. I do like my job. It's just I need that time away almost to appreciate it more. Yeah, if that makes sense. But in other ways, I think in terms of treating patients, my expectations were everyone's going to get on so well. I'm going to get on with every patient. Every technique's going to work. No one's going to have a treatment reaction. It was just this thing that you warned your patient about to be on the safe side. No. Like I had so many treatment reactions in the first 6 months, and some of them were kind of irreparable, not physically, but like the relationship, the trust, almost the patient was like, oh, this is so bad. Um, I thought you were gonna do something different or something better. I don't know. But otherwise, some people were like, I guess it does get worse before it gets better. This is okay. I trust you and I trust your process. And in another way, some techniques, i.e. HVTs, cavitating or cavitating, I think I had this vision that once you knew the technique, it would always cavitate. And your tutor said the cavitation's not the important part, but everyone secretly knows you're dying to hear that pop, right? Even the patients. And sometimes what's reassuring is that I'll see the same person for different treatments. Sometimes it goes, and sometimes it doesn't. And I always think, okay, clearly didn't necessarily need it, or we got the movement in there and it's absolutely fine. And I think in the first 6 months, I was definitely petrified because I was like, am I suddenly getting worse at the techniques? I don't know. But yeah, I think slowly, with confidence growing and realizing that that's just all natural in terms of coming out of school and just you're seeing a different demographic. Things are going to be so different. Yeah, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And so, is there anything, I wonder, that you would have liked to have known or wish you knew when you graduated, reflecting back?
Yeah, but also I'm not sure my graduation period could have been better advised because we were going into the pandemic. So in a way, no one knew how to prepare for that, and no one could predict how it was going to influence working in our field. But I think the things that I wish that I knew were that not every practice that you applied to work at or going to work in would be the right one for you. I think we all just assumed we saw a job that looked very convenient and nice. We applied, hopefully we got the job, and if we did, it would be like rainbows and sunshine, and it's not realistically like that all the time. So that was definitely a shock, but a very valuable learning experience to go through. And then that not all osteopaths have the same goals. And that's not, I don't want to sound pessimistic or cynical, but different generations of osteopaths have completely different ways of working. And some people like their clinics to treat in a certain way, and others really nourish and nurture the fact that all their associates are different in style. Yeah, I think even though I was doing part-time work during my studies at a clinic that I work in now, I thought I had an idea of what it was like, but actually that place is quite unique. And you're hearing about other experiences and having other experiences myself, I realized, oh yeah, not every clinic's like this one that I know of. which is a great thing. But also, I now know what works for me, which is this place, but it's not going to be uniform in the field. So yeah, I wish maybe I'd known that before, but again, I don't know if you can really reflect that.
Absolutely. I think that's such a strong message, especially as a graduate. You know, you're looking for the first available job because you've got bills to pay. You want to justify the last 4 years as well. And sometimes the first job or the first couple of jobs you have don't work for whatever reason. And I think we need to normalize that because there are so many people that I graduated with that had the same experience. You know, first job didn't work out. They learned something, they moved on from that. And so it's not that you've failed, it's just that wasn't the right fit for you at that time.
Hmm.
And I think nobody told me that when I was like, at least in my final year or anything like that. Nobody told me that it's okay to leave a job.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, you're just kind of expected, and people are anticipating you to get in somewhere and just flourish. You've been equipped with all the tools, now you go and make it work. But actually, it's not that there's anything necessarily going wrong or bad at this particular clinic. It's just there's something that doesn't fit. It doesn't feel like you're doing your absolute best there, or you're absolutely happy. And I think it took some courage to leave, especially because people were saying, "Oh, it's crazy, it's during the pandemic. You're leaving a job. Are you mad?" And I'm just like, well, in the long run, and now looking back, I think God knows what I would have been like if I'd stayed, and how would that have informed my treatments with patients. And yeah, I I'm glad I took that step, but I hadn't heard of anyone doing that. I hadn't heard of anyone leaving somewhere after being there for 3 months. So I felt like an anomaly and I felt like a failure, but it's reassuring to hear that it wasn't just me. So yeah, I guess, yeah, that's what I wish I knew.
You lasted longer at your first job than I did. Um, but I think because it's so normalized in like the corporate field or the financial field that, you're expected to leave a job after a couple of
Mm,
years because maybe that's the progression that you've made and that's the cap that's made on you. So you go to a different position, but it's not talked about in our field or in the medical field or so nobody knows that and nobody tells you that. And I think it's such an important, I'm really grateful to be able to have that conversation with you and to be able to share that with people because there could be graduates this year who are going through the exact same thing, and because no one's told them, hey, just leave that job. Again, everyone's got their reasons, for whatever reason it
mm,
is. If it's not working, it's okay for it not to work, and it's okay
yeah.
to distance yourself from that.
I think it's also a very British thing to feel like you're tied into a contract now and you're kind of responsible for your principal's emotional well-being or like stress levels, because it's going to be stressful if your employee or associate wants to leave because you have to go through the hiring process again. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I'm an awful person for putting this burden on someone who gave me a job. Like, I'm horrible. But, you're doing them more of a disservice staying there and not having a good time with it than, leaving and then finding the right person. Because you don't want to be deceiving yourself and your boss. It's never going to work out very well. But no, I think I'm grateful for having the space to talk about it with you, because it was something that I felt really uncomfortable talking about for a really long time. And more recently, a few friends of mine have left jobs. They lasted maybe 10 months or 11 months. Um, but it was happening around me, and I was starting to realize, okay, it's not as taboo as I thought. It's not just me, and now we can talk about it, and I don't feel like my journey so far has been less successful, if that makes sense.
At
Yeah.
all. I mean, you're employed, you're teaching. That's more than a lot of people, for example, who have graduated around the same time that you've graduated can say. And I think we have to be kind to ourselves, because I kind of get the impression that you're very critical of yourself. You can be really harsh on yourself. And so being able to just say, hey, that's okay, you
Hmm.
know? And one thing that I've learned is contracts are there for a reason, right? You know,
Yes.
you have terms of conditions, you have, how long you give notice for, things like that. And everyone, what I've learned, and especially working in the institutions that I'm working in at the moment, is everyone is replaceable. Like, if
Yeah.
you want to leave, leave, because they will find someone to replace you. And that's okay. Like you said, it might be someone who's a better fit for that job, or who's going to bring something different that would work for that clinic or that institution. And so, yeah, I think, especially for a lot of us, especially for you, especially for New Year, like having gone through, the pandemic and studying, and I think you just got to do what makes you happy. And it sounds really
Yeah.
like cliche, or you know.
No, I know what you mean. I mean, I agree completely, but I have heard, older people say, oh, it's such a millennial problem to have. You just want a work-life balance. And I'm like, no, I just want to be sane. I just want to be functioning properly and be happy. And there's still this idea going around that you kind of have to hate your work in order for it to be considered work. And it definitely, in our field, no, it's a very rewarding job at times. And I think, yeah, anyone who says that you're asking too much to be happy is immediately as a red flag. It's a red flag. So but yeah, again, things you learn with time and communicating with other people. So yeah, it's good to hear that you've had that experience as well, for sure.
Absolutely. And you're supposed to have a work-life balance. That should be
Yeah.
expected. Like, I know I can't do 12-hour days. It's just not who I am. And I'm
Mm.
very lucky in the NHS that, you work sort of, do like 9 to 5, and like that to me is what I can tolerate. But I have friends who do 12-hour shifts in a clinic, and I'm like, good for you, but I would be a puddle on the floor if I did that.
Exactly, yeah.
Mm. So I've so appreciated our time together, but I don't want to finish our conversation without asking you, what makes you excited, whether it's inside or outside of the profession?
I found this the hardest question. I knew you were going to ask me about what I was excited about, and I took the longest time to think about it because I don't know where the profession is going in a way. There's a lot of change that could potentially happen, and there's a huge difference in the people that have graduated recently compared to people who graduated 20 years ago. And our field is thankfully developing to be more evidence-based, which is fantastic. And I I have high hopes for us to become better recognized within the public sphere in terms of being, valid allied health professionals that you can go and almost get screened with, essentially, because during the pandemic, people were so desperate or had physio appointments on video call in the NHS, and they weren't satisfied. And they came to the closest thing to that, which was an osteopath, which was a new experience for them. And I don't want to offend anyone by talking about this positive side to the pandemic, but this is a silver lining in a way, and it's in healthcare, which is great. So I'm excited to see public awareness growing in terms of the knowledge and breadth of the knowledge that osteopaths have, because we do have quite an extensive level of training, which is why so many people leave, because it's so much more intense than you think going into it. Um, so that's exciting, I think. And then in terms of outside, I don't really know. I think I left another job a few months ago. And so now I'm solely working in one practice and doing the teaching, and I have more time for creative endeavors. And that's something that I'm very excited to pursue. Yeah, what about you?
Oh, what am I excited? Like I've always like I always strive for that work-life balance. So similarly, like when I'm not doing osteopathy, I'm not doing osteopathy. You know, like you, like I'd love to be able to get back to like a dance class,
Yeah.
and just be able to move in a creative way, and maybe not ballet because that was tough. Oh
Yeah.
man. But something like a jazz or contemporary class where you can just throw yourself and really like really feel the grit of it.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to do something like that soon. But yeah, I think for me, being able to do lots of different things that aren't strictly osteopathy, like the teaching and the Pilates on my side and things like that, that's what makes it varied enough for me that it creates this fluidity.
Yeah.
And maybe it's too much, but for now it's enough.
Yeah, you'll find out if it's too much further down the line. At the moment, if it feels good, then just go with it.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm so thankful to be able to have you sit down with us, because I think we've definitely covered things that I've been yearning to talk about.
Oh, good.
And I think it's so important to be able to put that out and let other people know that they're not alone feeling the things that they're feeling. And it's so interesting, to have your perspective because you would have graduated more recently than me and see how
Mm,
I can see some of my experience in you, but also how different your individual experience is to yourself.
definitely. No, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been really cool.
Yeah, and we'll have to have you back and we can do a whole other session and talk for a couple of hours more, I'm sure. So
Life is dramatic. I'm sure things will happen in the meantime that we can learn from.
it's like we're just writing the script. We've done the first sort of act. We need like a plot twist now.
Exactly.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alex. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.